The letter arrived with blood still wet on its edges, and Evangeline knew her brother was already dead. She held the crimson-stained parchment with trembling fingers as Colonel Harwick's words echoed in the suffocating heat of the tent. Your brother Marcus fell at Shiloh, miss. Took a Confederate bullet defending the colors. His weathered face creased with practiced sympathy. But his sacrifice gives you a chance to honor his memory. The camp buzzed around them, soldiers, cleaning rifles, mending uniforms, writing letters they might never send. Evangeline felt the weight of 100 watching eyes, though none dared stare directly at the only woman among 10,000 men. Her dark hair was pinned severely beneath a widow's black bonnet, her traveling dress modest but well-tailored. She looked every inch the grieving sister come to collect her brother's effects. She was not. You want me to cross enemy lines, she said quietly, folding the letter with mechanical precision. To play the part of a war widow seeking her husband's grave. The Confederates have established a stronghold 15 miles south. Fort Meridian. Harwick leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Our scouts report they're planning something big, a supply route that could feed their armies through winter. We need to know when, where, and how many men. Evangeline's fingers found the locket at her throat, a nervous habit she'd carried since childhood. Inside lay a miniature portrait of the real Marcus. Not her brother, but her lover, killed not by Confederate bullets, but by Union sabotage gone wrong. The official story was simpler. Loving sister mourning fallen sibling. The truth would hang her as a double agent. And if I'm discovered, Harwick's smile held no warmth. You won't be. Women make the finest spies, Miss Evangeline. Men see what they expect to see. A grieving woman, harmless as morning dew. He slid a second envelope across the rough-hewn table. Your credentials. Confederate sympathizer from Maryland, married to Captain James Thorne, reported killed at Bull Run. You're searching for his final resting place to give your heart peace. The irony cut deep. She had been searching for peace since Marcus died in her arms, his blood warm on her hands as he whispered Union secrets with his final breath. Secrets she'd sold to the highest bidder until the war made everyone a buyer and seller of death. There's more. Harwick produced a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. Oleander extract. Tasteless, odorless. 1 drop in water, and death comes like sleep within the hour. His eyes glittered. Intelligence gathering is your primary mission. But if the opportunity presents itself to eliminate their commanding officer, Colonel Alexander Blackwood, take it. Evangeline had heard whispers of Blackwood around Union campfires. The ghost of Georgia, they called him. A man who struck like lightning and vanished like smoke, whose tactical brilliance had cost the Union 3 major victories. Some said he was invincible. Others claimed he'd made a pact with the devil himself. Why Blackwood specifically? Because he's the reason we're losing this war. Harwick's fist struck the table, making the oil lamp flicker. Every strategy we devise, he counters. Every trap we set, he escapes. Kill Alexander Blackwood, and the Confederate resistance in this sector crumbles. As if summoned by their conversation, a commotion erupted outside the tent. Shouts, running feet, the thunder of hoofbeats approaching fast. Harwick cursed and strode to the tent flap, peering into the growing dusk. What is it? Evangeline asked. Patrol coming in hard. Someone's hurt bad. He turned back to her, decision crystallizing in his weathered features. You leave tonight. Jenkins will escort you to the crossing point, a burned-out church 5 miles south. From there, you're on your own. Evangeline pocketed the vial and forged papers, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the distance, she could hear a man, screaming, harsh, animal sounds of agony that cut through the evening air like a blade. The sounds of war, of men dying badly and far from home. She thought of Marcus, how he'd held her face in his hands the night before that final mission. Promise me something, Eva, he'd whispered. If I don't come back, don't let them turn you into what this war demands. Don't let them steal your heart. Too late for that, she thought, watching Harwick clean his pistol with mechanical efficiency. The war had already taken everything soft and good from the world, leaving only the necessary cruelties behind. The screaming outside grew louder, more desperate. Through the canvas walls, she caught fragments of shouted conversation. Ambush at Devil's Creek, only survivor, Blackwood's men came out of nowhere. Harwick's head snapped up. Blackwood struck again. Third patrol this week. He fixed her with his pale stare. That man out there dying. That's what your target does to our boys. Remember that when the time comes to use what's in that vial. Evangeline nodded, though something cold settled in her stomach. She'd killed before, 3 men, each justified by war's brutal arithmetic. But never by poison. Never while looking into someone's eyes and pretending love. There's one more thing, Harwick said as she moved toward the tent flap. Blackwood's not just a soldier. Intelligence suggests he's planning to marry soon. Some Southern belle whose family owns half of Georgia. If you can get close to him through his romantic attachments, he didn't need to finish. Evangeline understood perfectly. Seduce the target, gain his trust, then deliver death with a lover's kiss. Outside, the wounded man's screams had faded to broken whimpers. The sunset painted the camp in shades of blood and gold, and somewhere in the gathering darkness, an owl called its lonely question to the night. What she didn't know was that the man screaming in agony outside Harwick's tent had already seen her face, and come tomorrow. He would whisper a description to the very Confederate colonel she'd been sent to kill. The burned church stood like a broken prayer against the star-drunk sky. Evangeline pulled her shawl tighter as Jenkins helped her down from the supply wagon, his young face grave in the moonlight. Around them, the ruins of what had once been a sanctuary stretched in blackened timber and crumbling stone. Another casualty of Sherman's march, where sacred and profane burned with equal fervor. "This is as far as I go, miss," Jenkins whispered, glancing nervously at the treeline. "Confederate pickets patrol regular past midnight. You'll want to cross at the creek bend, stay low in the cattails." He pressed a small bundle into her hands. "Hardtack and jerky. Not much, but it'll keep you till you reach their lines." Evangeline nodded, studying the young soldier's face. Barely 18, with downy cheeks and eyes that had seen too much too soon. "What's your Christian name, Private?" "Tommy, miss. Tommy Whitmore, from Pennsylvania." She touched his arm gently. "Tommy Whitmore from Pennsylvania. You have someone waiting for you back home?" His face lit despite their grim surroundings. "Yes, miss. Mary Catherine. We're to be married when this war ends." He fumbled in his coat pocket, producing a miniature daguerreotype. Prettiest girl in all of Lancaster County. Looking at the young woman's serious face in the photograph, Evangeline felt something twist in her chest. So much hope in those young features, so much trust that love could survive the machinery of war. "She's beautiful. Hold tight to that hope, Tommy. You really think this'll all be over soon, miss?" The question hung between them like incense in the ruined church. Evangeline had seen the strategic maps, heard the general's private conversations. This war would grind on for years yet, consuming boys like Tommy until the continent ran red with their blood. But looking into his earnest face, she found herself saying, "I believe it will, Tommy. I believe you'll see your Mary Catherine again." He smiled, the first genuine expression she'd seen from any soldier in weeks. "Thank you, miss. That means more than you know." He climbed back onto the wagon bench, gathering the reins. "God keep you safe across those lines." As the wagon disappeared into the darkness, Evangeline stood alone among the church ruins. Moonlight streamed through the broken roof, illuminating an altar where wildflowers had taken root between shattered stones. Nature reclaiming what man had destroyed. There was something almost hopeful in that, she thought. She opened her traveling case and began the transformation. Off came the severe black dress, replaced by a more modest brown woolen gown with a torn sleeve and mud-stained hem. She mussed her carefully pinned hair, allowing strands to escape and frame her face with calculated disarray. From a small vial, she dabbed beneath her eyes with onion water, an old actress's trick that would keep them red and swollen for hours. The final touch was Marcus's ring, worn on her left hand and turned inward so only the plain gold band showed. Let the Confederates see a grieving widow, lost and desperate. Let them think her harmless. The creek ran cold and swift, fed by spring rains that turned the crossing treacherous. Evangeline waded in slowly, her skirts growing heavy with water, feeling for stable footing on the slick stones. Halfway across, she heard it, the soft whinny of a horse, the creak of leather, the whispered exchange of men trying to remain undetected. Confederate patrol. She froze in the middle of the stream, water swirling around her waist, hardly daring to breathe. Through the cattails, she glimpsed movement, gray uniforms, the glint of rifle barrels in the moonlight. Her hand found the small pistol hidden in her bodice, thumb working over the hammer. Thought I heard something. Just a deer, probably. Check downstream anyway. Evangeline made her choice. Better to be discovered as a helpless woman than caught sneaking like a spy. She let out a deliberate gasp, stumbling forward as if the current had caught her, and fell with a splash that echoed across the water. There! Someone's in the creek. Hold your fire. Could be civilians. 3 soldiers crashed through the undergrowth, rifles raised. In the lead rode a sergeant with graying whiskers and kind eyes. The sort of man who'd been someone's beloved. Father before the war claimed him. Behind him, 2 younger men with the lean, hungry look of soldiers who'd been fighting too long on too little food. "Ma'am," the sergeant urged his horse into the shallow water. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Evangeline let herself sob, shoulders shaking with manufactured grief. "Please," she gasped, "please help me. I've been walking for days. My husband, Captain James Thorne, they said he fell at Bull Run, but I can't find his grave. I just want to find where they laid him to rest." The sergeant's expression softened immediately. He dismounted and waded toward her, offering his arm. "Easy now, ma'am. You're safe. We'll get you dried off and fed." He looked back at his men. "Riley, give the lady your coat. Peterson, break out some of that cornbread." As they helped her to shore, Evangeline studied their faces. Good men, all of them. Men with families, with hopes beyond this endless war. Men she might have to deceive, manipulate, or worse before her mission ended. The thoughts sat heavy in her chest like undigested. "Bread. I'm Sergeant Mitchell," the older man said, wrapping Riley's coat around her shoulders. "These are my boys, Riley and Peterson. What's your name, ma'am?" "Sarah," she whispered, using the alias from her forged papers. "Sarah Thorne. From Baltimore." She let her voice break on her husband's name. "James wrote to me from Virginia. Said his regiment was heading to Manassas. That was the last I heard before. Now, don't you fret," Mitchell said gently. "Bull Run was a hard fight, but we kept good records. If your husband fell there, we'll help you find him. My word on it." As they rode toward the Confederate camp, Evangeline found herself genuinely moved by their kindness. Riley, barely older than Tommy Whitmore, insisted she take his rations. Peterson walked alongside her horse, making gentle conversation about the weather and the wildflowers blooming despite the war's devastation. These were not the monsters Union propaganda painted them as. They were simply men caught in history's grinding wheels, fighting for causes they believed righteous, while the world burned around them. The camp appeared gradually through the morning mist, a sprawling collection of tents and crude shelters. Nestled in a valley between 2 hills, smoke rose from cooking fires, and she could hear the sounds of an army at rest. Men talking quietly, horses nickering, the distant ring of a hammer on an anvil. "Quite a sight, isn't it?" Mitchell said, noticing her wide-eyed expression. "Near 3,000 men, all told. Finest soldiers in Georgia." Fort Meridian was larger than Union intelligence had suggested. Much larger. If the Confederates were planning a major offensive from here, it could change the entire course of the war. Evangeline filed away every detail. The placement of artillery, the condition of the horses, the number of supply wagons as they approached the command tent. A figure emerged that made her heart stop, tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. He moved with the fluid grace of a born horseman. His uniform was well-tailored but practical, and when he looked up at their approaching party, his gaze was sharp enough to cut glass. Colonel Alexander Blackwood, the ghost of Georgia himself, and he was staring directly at her with an expression of dawning recognition that turned her blood to ice water. Sergeant Mitchell, his voice carried the soft drawl of old Georgia, cultured but not affected. "I see you found our midnight visitor." "Yes, sir. Lady named Sarah Thorne, looking for her husband's grave from Bull Run. Thought you might want to speak with her yourself." Blackwood stepped closer, those storm-gray eyes never leaving her face. "Indeed I do." His smile was sharp as a bayonet's edge. "Tell me, Mrs. Thorne, did you happen to encounter any Union patrols on your journey south?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a musket volley. Around them, the camp seemed to grow quiet, as if the very earth was holding its breath. Evangeline met his stare and realized with growing terror that somehow, impossibly, Alexander Blackwood already knew exactly who she was. Union patrols. Evangeline forced her voice to quaver with the right note of feminine confusion. I don't understand, Colonel. I've seen no soldiers save your own men. Blackwood circled her slowly, like a predator studying wounded prey. Curious, because, not 12 hours ago, one of my scouts reported seeing a woman matching your description at a Union camp 15 miles north. His boots crunched on the frost-brittle grass. Dark hair, traveling dress, perhaps 25 years of age. Most peculiar coincidence. The vial of oleander extract seemed to burn against her ribs where she'd hidden it. Around them, soldiers had begun to gather, drawn by the drama unfolding before their colonel's tent. Evangeline felt the weight of their stares, the building tension that crackled like lightning before a storm. I've been walking for days, she whispered, letting tears spill down her cheeks. Through forests, across streams. Perhaps your scout saw me then, but I assure you, Colonel, I've had no congress with Union forces. I'm searching for my husband's grave, nothing more. Blackwood stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could smell the leather of his boots, the faint scent of tobacco and cedar that clung to his uniform. When he spoke, his voice was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. Show me your hands. I beg your pardon. Your hands, Mrs. Thorne. Show them to me. Heart hammering, Evangeline extended her hands palm up. Blackwood studied them with the intensity of a scholar reading ancient texts. His fingers, long, calloused from years of handling weapons, traced across her palms with surprising gentleness. Soft, he murmured. Well tended. These are not the hands of a woman who's been walking through wilderness for days. His thumb found a small callus at the base of her index finger. But this is from regular practice with a pistol. Most ladies of my acquaintance don't possess such marks. The trap was closing around her like a snare. Evangeline felt sweat beating at her hairline despite the morning chill. My husband taught me to shoot, she said quickly, for protection while he was away at war. Blackwood released her hands, stepping back with that predatory smile still playing at his lips. And where in Baltimore did you reside, Mrs. Thorne? Fells Point, near the harbor. Lovely area. I spent a summer there as a boy, visiting my aunt's family. Tell me, is old Mrs. Pemberton still operating her boarding house on Thames Street? Evangeline's mind raced. She'd studied maps of Baltimore, but had never actually lived there. I'm not familiar with that establishment. Strange. It's quite famous in the neighborhood. Been there for 30 years. Blackwood's eyes glittered, with dangerous amusement. Unless, of course, you're not actually from Baltimore at all. The gathered soldiers shifted restlessly, hands drifting toward weapons. Evangeline realized she was moments away from being exposed as a spy, and spies, even women, faced the gallows in wartime. Then salvation came from an unexpected source. Colonel Blackwood, sir. A young lieutenant came running up, saluting breathlessly. Urgent dispatch from General Beauregard's headquarters. Blackwood's attention shifted to the messenger, and Evangeline saw her chance. She swayed on her feet, pressing a hand to her forehead with theatrical desperation. Forgive me, she gasped. I feel quite faint. The journey, the worry about my dear James. She let her knees buckle, collapsing gracefully into Sergeant Mitchell's arms. The old soldier caught her with fatherly concern, immediately shouting for water and a place for the lady to rest. Get her to the medical tent, Blackwood ordered, though his voice carried a note of frustration. Dr. Whitman can tend to her. He turned to the lieutenant. What news from Beauregard? As Mitchell and his men carried her away, Evangeline caught fragments of urgent conversation. Union reinforcements moving south, supplies cut off at Chattanooga, must accelerate the timeline. The medical tent smelled of carbolic acid and suffering. Dr. Whitman, a kind-faced man in his 50s, fussed over her with genuine concern while she maintained her facade of feminine weakness. Just exhaustion and grief, I suspect, he told Mitchell. Let her rest here today. Some broth and sleep will set her right. But Evangeline wasn't resting. As the camp settled into its daily routines around her, she listened, observed, and cataloged every detail. The fort was indeed preparing for something major. Soldiers cleaning weapons with unusual care, officers huddled over maps, supply wagons arriving under heavy guard. Most intriguingly, she overheard two lieutenants discussing the Charleston operation and General Lee's special orders. If Fort Meridian was preparing to move on Charleston, it could shift the entire balance of power in the South. As evening approached, Dr. Whitman brought her a bowl of thin soup and sat beside her cot. Feeling better, Mrs. Thorne? Thank you. You're very kind. She studied his weathered face. Doctor, may I ask you something? Of course. You're Colonel Blackwood. What manner of man is he? I confess, his questions earlier frightened me. Whitman's expression grew thoughtful. Alexander's a complicated soul, brilliant tactician, finest horseman I've ever seen. But, he paused, choosing his words carefully. He's lost much in this war. His younger brother fell at Gettysburg. His father's plantation was burned by Union raiders. I think it's made him suspicious of everyone, even women seeking their husbands' graves. Evangeline felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. He's unmarried then? Was engaged once. Beautiful Charleston belle named Victoria Hartwell. But Whitman's voice dropped. She was caught passing information to Union forces. Blackwood himself discovered her treachery. The doctor's eyes grew distant. They say he loved her truly, but duty demanded he turn her in. She was hanged 3 months ago. The soup turned to ash in Evangeline's mouth. No wonder Blackwood had been so suspicious. He'd already been betrayed by one woman's spy. The irony was almost too bitter to bear. How tragic, she whispered. Indeed. Since then, he's thrown himself into the war with frightening intensity. Some say he's trying to die honorably rather than live with the memory of what he had to do. As night fell, Evangeline lay on her cot listening to the sounds of the camp settling into sleep. Guard posts were established, passwords exchanged, and gradually the conversations died away to occasional murmurs and the distant call of night birds. She waited until the moon was high, then slipped from the medical tent into the silver-washed darkness. Moving like a shadow between the sleeping soldiers, she made her way toward the command area where the important maps and documents would be kept. The information she'd gathered was valuable, but she needed specifics, troop numbers, dates, supply routes. The command tent was guarded by a single sentry, but Evangeline had learned to move unseen long before this war began. She circled around to the tent's rear, where a loose flap allowed her to slip inside undetected. Moonlight filtering through the canvas illuminated a scene of organized chaos. Maps spread across tables, dispatches pinned to boards, supply manifests stacked in neat piles. She began photographing documents with a small camera hidden in her corset when a voice from the shadows froze her blood. I was wondering when you'd make your move. Colonel Blackwood stepped into the light, fully dressed despite the late hour. His hand rested casually on his pistol grip, but his eyes held a strange mixture of sadness and admiration. How long have you known? She asked, abandoning all pretense. Since the moment I saw you. My scout's description was quite detailed. He had plenty of time to observe you at the Union camp before taking a Confederate bullet. Blackwood moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. The question is, what am I going to do about it? Evangeline's hand found the small derringer hidden in her bodice. That depends on what you want from me, Colonel. What I want. His laugh held no humor. I want this war to end. I want my brother back from his grave. I want to believe there's still honor left in this world. His storm gray eyes met hers. But mostly, I want to know why a woman with your obvious intelligence and courage is risking her life for a cause that will see her hanged if she's caught. The honest pain in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the cold-blooded killer Union propaganda had described. This was a man broken by loss, driven by duty, and haunted by the ghost of a woman he'd loved and been forced to destroy. We all have our reasons, Colonel, she said softly. Indeed we do. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines that grief had carved around his eyes. Tell me, miss, what is your real name? Evangeline, she whispered, and realized with shock that she wanted him to know, wanted this man who'd lost everything to know at least that much truth about her. Evangeline. He spoke her name like a prayer, or perhaps a curse. A beautiful name for a beautiful spy. She kept the derringer trained on his chest, though her hand trembled slightly. Are you going to turn me in, Colonel? That depends. Blackwood moved to the map table, his movements deliberate and calm despite the weapon pointed at his heart. On whether you're here to gather intelligence or to kill me. The directness of his question caught her off guard. What makes you think? Because. That's what I would do. He traced a finger along the map's edge, not looking at her. Send an attractive woman to seduce the enemy commander, gain his trust, then slip poison into his evening brandy. It's what I'd do if I were desperate enough. Evangeline's breath caught. He described her mission with unnerving accuracy. And if I were here for such a purpose, then you'd already be dead. His eyes met hers across the dimly lit tent. I've been watching you since you arrived, Evangeline. Every movement, every expression. You're good, better than Victoria ever was. But you're not here to kill me. How can you be so certain? Because you've had 3 opportunities already and taken none of them. He began rolling up one of the maps with methodical precision. When Dr. Whitman left you alone with his medical supplies, laudanum would have been child's play to steal. When you helped serve dinner to the officers, a dozen chances to slip something into a cup. And just now, when you found me waiting in the shadows. He was right, and the realization unsettled her. She'd been so focused on gathering intelligence that she'd barely considered the assassination aspect of her mission. The vial of oleander extract remained untouched in her bodice. Perhaps I'm simply waiting for the right moment, she said, though the words felt hollow. Perhaps. Blackwood finished with the map and turned to face her fully. Or perhaps you're discovering what I learned too late with Victoria, that some enemies are harder to kill than others. What do you mean? I mean that sometimes the line between enemy and ally becomes as blurred as morning mist over a battlefield. He stepped closer, ignoring the gun still pointed at him. Tell me, Evangeline, when you look at my men, at Sergeant Mitchell, at young Riley who gave you his coat, do you see monsters worthy of death? The question hit her like a physical blow. She thought of Tommy Whitmore's eager face, of his plans to marry Mary Catherine, of Riley's kindness, Mitchell's fatherly concern, Dr. Whitman's gentle hands tending to her imaginary ailments. They're good men, she admitted quietly, fighting for a cause they believe in, just as you are. Blackwood was close enough now that she could see the pain behind his controlled exterior. The tragedy of this war isn't that we're fighting devils, Evangeline. It's that we're fighting other angels who simply kneel at different altars. That's a dangerous philosophy for a Confederate colonel. Dangerous? Yes, but true nonetheless. He reached out slowly, his fingers closing gently around her gun hand. May I? She could have pulled the trigger. Should have, perhaps. Instead, she found herself allowing him to lower the weapon, though she didn't release her grip entirely. Why haven't you exposed me? She asked. Because I'm hoping you might help me prevent a slaughter. He returned to the map table, pulling out a detailed chart of the Charleston harbor. Your Union commanders sent you here to learn about our supply routes, didn't they? To discover our plans for the coming offensive? Evangeline nodded, not trusting. Her voice. Then you need to see this. He spread the map before her, pointing to a series of red marks along the coastline. Fort Meridian isn't preparing to attack Charleston. We're preparing to defend it. Union forces are planning a massive naval assault in 10 days' time. 40 ships, 6,000 men, artillery that will reduce the city to rubble. She studied the markings, her trained eye quickly grasping the tactical implications. That's impossible. Our intelligence suggests. Your intelligence is wrong. Blackwood's voice was grim. One of my best scouts infiltrated Union headquarters. At Hilton Head, the assault is already in motion. He pointed to another section of the map. They plan to bombard civilian areas first to break morale. Schools, hospitals, churches, nothing will be spared. You're lying. But even as she spoke, Evangeline felt a chill of recognition. She'd seen the supply manifests at Union headquarters, the unusual shipments of heavy artillery, the whispered conversations about making the South pay in blood. I wish I were. Blackwood's finger traced along the harbor's edge. 6,000 civilians still live in Charleston, Evangeline. Children, elderly, families who have nowhere else to go. The Union commanders know this, and they don't care. The implications struck her like a thunderbolt. If Blackwood was telling the truth, then her mission wasn't just about gathering intelligence. It was about enabling a massacre. What do you want from me? She whispered. Help me save them. His storm gray eyes searched her face. You have access to Union communications, don't you? Ways to get messages through their lines. Ah, yes. But why would you trust me with such information? Because you're not a killer, Evangeline. You're a soldier, and soldiers protect innocents. He moved closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. Because when you look at me, I don't see hatred in your eyes. I see the same exhaustion I feel, the same longing for this war to end without more needless death. She wanted to deny it, to maintain the professional distance that had kept her alive through 3 years of espionage. But standing in the moonlit tent with this man who'd seen through all her deceptions, she found herself unable to lie. What would you have me do? Carry a message to your commanders. Tell them about the civilians still in Charleston. Ask them to delay the assault until the innocents can be evacuated. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with surprising gentleness. Give diplomacy one last chance before we resort to slaughter. It was madness. Absolute madness. She was a Union spy, and he was a Confederate colonel. They were enemies by every definition that mattered. Yet looking into his eyes, she saw the same weary hope that kept her awake at night. The dream that somehow, someway, this war might end with something other than total devastation. And if I refuse, then you'll return to your handlers with the intelligence you came for, and in 10 days, Charleston will burn. His thumb traced across her knuckles. But I don't think you'll refuse. You're asking me to betray my own cause. I'm asking you to serve a higher cause. He released her hand, stepping back. The preservation of innocent life. Before she could respond, the tent flap burst open. Riley stumbled in, his young face flushed with excitement and fear. Colonel, Union patrol approaching from the east. Looks like a full company, maybe more. Blackwood's expression hardened instantly, the tender moment shattering like glass. How far? Mile, maybe less. Sergeant Mitchell's already rousing the men. Go. Tell Mitchell to prepare defensive positions, but hold fire unless fired upon. Riley saluted and ran back into the night. Blackwood turned to Evangeline, his voice urgent. They're coming for you, aren't they? Evangeline's mind raced. A full company meant serious force, far more than would be needed for a simple reconnaissance mission. It's possible. If they suspect I've been compromised, then we have minutes before this camp becomes a battlefield. He grabbed her arm, not roughly, but with desperate intensity. Evangeline, I need an answer. Will you carry my message or not? Outside, she could hear the sounds of men preparing for battle. The click of rifle bolts, the whispered passage of orders, the nervous snorting of horses sensing danger. In the distance, faint but growing closer, came the sound of approaching hoofbeats. If I agree, she said quickly, how do I know you won't betray me to your own men? Because I'm going to help you escape. He was already moving, gathering maps and papers. There's a ravine behind the medical tent, leads down to the river. You can follow it north until you're clear of the fighting. And you? I have a duty to my men. His smile was sad but resolute. Some of us have to stay and fight. The hoofbeats were louder now, accompanied by the jingle of sabers and the creak of leather. Evangeline could see torchlight flickering through the tent walls. The Union patrol was almost upon them. Colonel Blackwood. Sergeant Mitchell's voice carried across the camp. Union cavalry, sir. They're demanding surrender. Blackwood's hand found his pistol, checking the cylinder with practiced efficiency. Give me your answer, Evangeline. Will you carry my message about the civilians in Charleston? She thought of Tommy Whitmore and his sweetheart Mary Catherine, of Riley's kindness and Dr. Whitman's gentle hands, of the children in Charleston who would burn if the naval assault proceeded as planned. Yes, she whispered. I'll carry your message. Relief flooded his features. Thank you. He pressed a folded paper into her hands. The details are all there. And Evangeline, yes. When this war ends, and if we both survive. He paused, as if gathering courage for a final charge. I'd like to see you again, not as enemies, but as two people who chose mercy over vengeance. Before she could respond, the night exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from the camp's perimeter, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness like deadly fireflies. Men shouted orders. Horses screamed, and the acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. Go! Blackwood shouted over the din. Get to the ravine. Evangeline ran for the tent's rear exit, clutching his message against her chest. As she burst through the canvas flap, a Union soldier appeared in her path, rifle raised. There she is. The spot. She dove sideways as his shot split the air where she'd been standing. Rolling behind a supply wagon, she came up with her derringer ready, but before she could fire, another shot rang out. The Union soldier collapsed, and Evangeline looked up to see Blackwood standing in the tent's entrance, smoking pistol in his hand. "The ravine," he called to her. Now, as she ran toward the darkness beyond the camp, gunfire blazing behind her, Evangeline realized that everything had changed. She was no longer just a spy carrying intelligence, but a woman carrying hope. For peace, and possibly her heart as well. The ravine swallowed Evangeline like a dark mouth, its steep sides muffling the gunfire that raged behind her. She stumbled through the undergrowth, thorns catching at her skirts, Blackwood's message pressed against her heart like a sacred relic. Behind her, Fort Meridian burned. She could see the orange glow painting the sky, hear the distant screams of wounded men and dying horses. Somewhere in that inferno, Alexander Blackwood was fighting for his life. The man who'd shown her that enemies could choose mercy over vengeance, that love could bloom even in war's barren soil. The river ran swift and cold, fed by spring rains. That turned the current treacherous. Evangeline waded in without hesitation, letting the icy water wash away the smoke and blood of battle. As she climbed the far bank, dawn was breaking gray and mournful over the Virginia countryside. She walked for 3 days, following deer paths and forgotten roads, living on wild berries and stream water. Twice she encountered Union patrols, but her genuine exhaustion and mud-stained dress made her look exactly like what she claimed to be, a refugee fleeing the fighting. On the 4th morning, she stood before Colonel Harwick's tent once more. "Evangeline." His pale eyes studied her with satisfaction. "Excellent work. I trust you gathered useful intelligence before the attack on Fort Meridian." She produced a detailed map she'd drawn from memory, troop positions, supply routes, defensive structures, all accurate, all valuable. But she kept Blackwood's message hidden against her ribs. "The fort was larger than expected," she reported. "Nearly 3,000 men, well-supplied and disciplined. Colonel Blackwood is indeed as formidable as his reputation suggests." "Was, you mean?" Harwick's smile was cold. "Reports indicate he died in the fighting. Put up quite a struggle before the end." Evangeline's heart stopped. "He's dead, killed defending his command tent, so they say. Heroic, in its way." Harwick spread her sketches across his table. "This intelligence will prove invaluable for our Charleston operation. The naval bombardment begins in 6 days." "About Charleston, Colonel." Evangeline forced her voice to remain steady. "I learned something else during my infiltration. There are still civilians in the city, thousands of them. Women, children, elderly who have nowhere else to go." Harwick didn't look up from the maps. "War is hard on everyone, my dear. That's why we must end it quickly. But surely we could delay the bombardment? Give them time to evacuate." Now Harwick did look up, his expression sharpening. "Are you questioning our strategy, Miss Evangeline?" The threat in his voice was unmistakable. She thought of Tommy Whitmore, probably dead now in the ruins of Fort Meridian, of Riley and Dr. Whitman, whose only crime had been showing kindness to a woman they believed needed help. "Of course not, Colonel. I simply thought." "Don't think. Follow orders." He rolled up the maps with military precision. "You've done excellent work, but your part in this war is finished. Report to the quartermaster for your payment and transportation back to Washington." Dismissed like a servant, Evangeline bowed her head in apparent submission, but her mind was racing. If Blackwood was truly dead, then his message about the civilians was all that remained of his attempt to prevent a massacre. She couldn't let his sacrifice be meaningless. That night, she slipped from her assigned quarters and made her way to the telegraph station. The operator, a young corporal named Davies, was known for his fondness for whiskey and loose women. Evangeline had neither to offer, but she had something better, information that could save his career. "Corporal Davies," she whispered, appearing like a ghost beside his station. "I know about the payroll money you've been skimming." His face went white. "I don't know what you mean, miss." $300 over the past 6 months, taken from dead soldiers' back pay. "Would you like me to mention this to Colonel Harwick, or would you prefer to send a message for me?" 20 minutes later, A coded telegram was racing through Union communication lines toward Washington. Not to military headquarters, but to a newspaper editor Evangeline had worked with before, a man who understood that some stories transcended the boundaries of war. The headline appeared in the Washington Chronicle 3 days later. Union forces planned bombardment of civilian targets in Charleston. The article, based on intelligence from sources close to military planning, detailed the upcoming assault and its likely impact on non-combatants still trapped in the city. Public outcry was swift and fierce. Senators demanded explanations. Church leaders condemned the targeting of innocents. Most importantly, 3 prominent Confederate families with relatives still in Charleston sent frantic telegrams pleading for a temporary ceasefire to allow evacuations. The bombardment was delayed by 2 weeks. It wasn't the peace Blackwood had hoped for, but it was time. Time for families to flee, for children to reach safety, for the innocent to escape the machinery of war. Evangeline read the news. From a small boarding house in Baltimore, her assumed identity as a war widow now her actual circumstance. She'd lost Marcus to bullets and betrayal. She'd lost Alexander to duty and flame. The war had taken everything soft from her heart, leaving only the hard necessity of survival. Or so she thought. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in May, carried by a one-armed veteran who said only that he'd been asked to deliver it to the lady who tends the roses. Evangeline's small garden behind the boarding house had indeed become her refuge, a place where she coaxed beauty from barren soil, where she tried to grow hope in the shadow of loss. Her hands trembled as she recognized the handwriting. Dearest Evangeline, if you are reading this, then Private Morrison has successfully tracked you down, and I am likely still among the living. The reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, though I confess I came closer to meeting my maker than I care to remember. Your message saved over 2,000 innocent lives in Charleston. The evacuation you made possible will be remembered long after this war's battles are forgotten. You chose mercy over duty, and in doing so, chose the better angels of our nature. The war continues, but it grows weaker each day. Men on both sides hunger for peace more than victory now. Perhaps that is the true triumph, not that one cause defeated another, but that we finally grew tired of defeating ourselves. I am resigning my commission when this letter reaches you. There are civilian clothes waiting for me in Richmond and a train ticket north. If you would consent to meet a former Confederate colonel who dreams of growing things instead of destroying them, I will be waiting in the Rose Garden behind St. Paul's Cathedral in Baltimore every Tuesday at sunset until you come. If you choose not to come, I will understand. We have been enemies longer than we have been anything else, and some wounds cut too deep for healing. But if there is any part of you that believes love can bloom in war's aftermath, that enemies can become gardeners together, then I will wait. Yours in hope and something deeper than hope. Alexander. Evangeline read the letter 3 times before she believed it. He was alive. More than that, he was coming to Baltimore, to her. That Tuesday, she stood before her mirror for an hour, trying to decide what a former spy should wear to meet a former enemy. In the end, she chose simplicity, a blue dress the color of spring sky, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, the rose she'd cut from her garden pinned over her heart. St. Paul's Cathedral rose like a prayer against the evening sky. Behind it, the small garden was ablaze with late spring blooms, roses in every shade from deepest crimson to palest white, their fragrance heavy on the warm air. He was waiting by the fountain, no longer in gray uniform, but in simple civilian clothes that made him look younger, less haunted. When he saw her approaching through the garden gate, his face lit with a joy so pure it took her breath away. You came, he said simply. I came, she replied. They stood there for a moment, former enemies in a garden full of roses, while the cathedral bells chimed the hour, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird sang its borrowed songs. I brought you something, Alexander said, producing a small envelope from his coat. A letter from Sergeant Mitchell. He survived the battle and wanted you to know that your kindness to his men wasn't forgotten. She opened it with trembling fingers, reading the old soldier's careful script. You were a spy, miss, and we were your enemies. But you treated us like human beings when you could have seen us as targets. That means something. That means everything. And I brought you this. Evangeline said, reaching into her reticule. She withdrew the vial of oleander extract, still unopened, still deadly. I never used it. I couldn't. Alexander took the vial and hurled it into the fountain with violent force. It shattered against the stone, its contents dispersing harmlessly in the water. Good, he said. Let's grow roses instead of poison. As the sun set over Baltimore, painting the cathedral walls gold and crimson, a former Confederate colonel and a former Union spy walked together through a garden where enemies had learned to bloom into something better. The war would end soon. Everyone knew that now. But here, among the roses they would tend together, peace had already taken root. Behind them, carved in stone above the cathedral door, words caught the last light of day. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the earth. In the distance, church bells rang out across the city, calling the faithful to evening prayer and reminding all who heard them that some things, love, hope, the chance for redemption, survive even war's worst devastations. What started as a mission of death had become a covenant of life, proving that sometimes the greatest victory is found not in defeating your enemy, but in discovering that love can transform enemies into gardeners of hope. If you enjoyed this tale of love blooming in war's shadow, share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, subscribe for more stories where hearts find their way home, even from the darkest battlefields.